This week, Nata explores the life and work of Artur Mistek, founder of Musica Zoologica, with contributions from Charlie Higson, Toby Jones, Eleanor Bron, and our own Zeb Soanes. Beautiful Dreamers, the symphony for all creation.
Well, here it is, Nat.
Oh, it's very modest. Artur Mistek, 1910 to 1979. And,
born and died here in the Białowieża Forest, Poland. And below the date, the inscription is culled from a letter he wrote to Shostakovich, which I believe translates as follows. We have learned that animals use tools and language, that animals laugh, cry, mourn their dead. Yet still we believe music is ours alone. Are we deaf? Oh. Listen. Buff Ariel. Archer would have loved that.
maybe it is Arthur, trying to tell us something.
No. That's a territorial aggression call.
Larry Gompert, Bert and Valerie M. Feisler, professor of music theory at the University of Southern California and a specialist in avant-garde music, has dedicated his life to the study of Mistek. But what was Artur Mistek, founder of Musica Zoologica and one of the 20th century's most intriguing and radical composers, trying to tell us? In March of this year, the chance discovery of lost Mistek recordings and correspondence in Moscow promised to solve one of modern classical music's longest-standing mysteries. Mistek's masterpiece, his Symphony for All Creation, was premiered in the Great Hall of the Moscow Conservatory on December the 9th, 1952, and performed only 5 more times. Until the recent find, no recording was thought to exist.
A lot of people perceive musicology to be a very dry subject. But with a discovery like this, you feel a little like a musicological Indiana Jones, or the Tom Hanks character in Da Vinci Code.
It's a sort of holy grail.
Yeah, but Holy Grail's been done, both by the Indy franchise and Da Vinci. These discoveries are more of a missing link, if you will, between Messiaen's use of birdsong and the sound experiments of Stockhausen and the other electronic composers. It's like an intellectual mystery, or a whodunit, in a musicological context.
Margaret Haynes, Mistek's only daughter, acts as an unofficial archivist of her late father's correspondence.
Callus.
Oh, hello, Callus.
And the little Yorkie is Domingo.
Domingo.
Optimistic names, I'm afraid.
I visited her at her home in Weymouth.
Well, here is the letter to Hanka, July the 3rd, 1928. Daddy had just got back home on summer vacation after his first year studying piano at the Conservatoire in Warsaw. This is the section. Do you remember, dearest Hanka, our old secret grove of mushrooms
beyond the coppice of birches? I was lying there in the sun, glutted with mushrooms, when I suddenly heard a sound I lack the eloquence to describe, and I proceeded quietly through the forest toward it. I found myself on the fringes of a glade, wherein stood, intent upon his music-making, a bear, plucking at a great splinter left erect on the stump of a felled beech tree. A perfect B-flat the beast was making, harmonized by the E-flat of the offender brooks overhead, and miraculously the G-natural of the creature's own soft growls of pleasure, an E-flat major tonic triad. My darling sister, could this dumb virtuoso of the woods have more music in him than Chopin himself?
Dr. Sir Hilary Finn, harpsichordist in residence at the Court of St. James and Accenture Professor Emeritus of Music Theory at Mansfield College, Oxford.
The Hanka letter is the first evidence we have that Mistek, even before he'd been exposed to the Parisian avant-garde, was at some level gestating Musica Zoologica, and the chord he mentions in the letter, E-flat, G, broken down, is amazingly the opening diverticulietical of Chopin's deeply nationalistic nocturne in E-flat, which, of course, was so beloved of Mistek.
Of course, like all Poles, Daddy absolutely adored Chopin, but the competition at the Conservatoire was very intense. And Daddy was in a particularly hard year. Also, he got very nervous during the exams. He decided, like Chopin, that academic training actually destroyed true musical feeling. So he dropped out and moved to Paris, where real pianists are made.
I knew Artur Mistek in Paris, and let me tell you, he was no Rubinstein.
Luca Davanzati, performance poet and sculptor.
He played Chopin like he had just caught the piano screwing his wife.
At the start of the 30s, the avant-garde was in fluxus. To put it reductively, the atonal school, people like Schoenberg, Webern and Berg, Ramification 4 by Schoenberg, the atonal school had two futures. One was to go back, to accept some measure of classical tonality and form. It was Dandelions by Hindemith. The other way was to go on, to explore the new soundscapes of the surrealists and early electronic music in the years before Robert Moog invented the synthesizer. This was the world Mistek was entering.
Here he is at a picnic in the Waldsee in Berlin in 1930. And you'll notice his companion.
Ah, the famous Wenceslas.
Doesn't he look pleased as punch?
Yes.
He's blurred because he's hopping up and down. Daddy saved him from starving in Paris. He had this amazing rapport with animals. In Poland, we'd say he was a man a slug would crawl through salt to be with.
Ah, the crow.
Luca Davanzati again.
We used to go round the Misteks to see the crow, and whoa, boy, his wife, Yanka, she was the most beautiful woman in Paris. She looked very like Arthur's sister, Hanka, who had suddenly emigrated to Buenos Aires. Well, everybody would go round to the Misteks to eat Yanka's mushroom tartlets, and for some reason, it was always a strangely creative atmosphere there. Everything was about inventing new forms. Georges Vakarin used to play his fingers with a piano. That had to hurt. Kempler the Swede composed a piece called Permanent Silence, which predated John Cage by 30 years. Yeah, he would ram two sharpened pencils in both your ears. Only 6 people ever heard it before they guillotined him. Arthur was a nice enough guy, but all that kind of stuff was over his head. We never expected anything from him.
Mistek combines avant-garde elements within a romantic framework, similar, or rather not dissimilar, to Messiaen. This recording, Mistek's first, is the B-side of a popular novelty hit, Put It Away, André, sung by 2 dwarfs playing the spoons. So, le très drôle Artur Mistek et son corps miraculeux playing Chopin's Polish Nocturne in E-flat major, 1932, a watershed in Musica Zoologica.
Okay, it's pretty cheesy. But remember, that's a 21-year-old kid.
But something was happening. In 1934, Mistek left Paris and spent the summer with Wenceslas in the Gdansk marshes of northern Poland, studying insect sounds and the calls of the wetland birds.
As dusk fell, the frogs started up in counterpoint to the crickets chafing, and I began to work the treadle of the recording apparatus. 6 weeks of gruelling labour refined to this one moment in the twilit reed bed.
This charming scherzo in G, although very simple, is in its way a perfect foretaste of the triumphs to come. This software lets us deconstruct the piece's elements. First, the crickets in 6/8, and these are Humboldt's frogs, and they're in 9/4, but syncopated. Very interesting. Johnny Greenwood of Radiohead often works with these time signatures.
With my trembling left hand on the 3rd beat of the bar, I revealed to the mother bittern its chick, which I had earlier removed from its nest. And as if it were taking its cue from a conductor's baton, The bird gave its bassoonish exhalation.
The bitten on the offbeat, a little figure in C-sharp major.
With my right hand, I extended my long birchwood mouse stick into the owl's field of vision, and I heard its perfectly punctual hoot of excitement.
Long-eared owl, D minor.
Thus I continued, rhythmically concealing and representing the bitten chick with my left, removing and representing the mouse with my right, until I gave, by nodding my head vigorously, Wenceslas his cue for the xylophone melody I had taught him this summer past.
Yes, just classic pianist's games. Da, dee, mouse up, chick out, mouse down, chick back. Then, Wenceslas. Simple, unaffected, very Polish. It's composed of sounds which predate instrumentation, and yet it's the most futuristic-sounding recording of the 1930s. Extraordinary.
Out of the blue, a kind of masterpiece from little Mistek. The first time I heard the scherzo, I could not believe the sound texturing. At the time, we were very into early electronic music. The theremin had just been invented, the onde Martineau, the automatic vibro radio horn belt.
Larry Gumpert is undecided.
This is the riddle. Was Mistek in the vanguard of the avant-garde, or was he in the rear guard of the avant-garde? The 11 recordings Mistek made between 1934 and 42 certainly had a considerable cachet in modernist musical circles. On the other hand, the Boulez school would deem the whole notion of zoologica sentimental, kitsch even. In his manifesto Musique sans âme, Boulez refers to Mistek as a putty bourgeois cockroach, faintly screaming from the inside of its killing jar.
Boulez. Well, Boulez called Mozart a laughable mediocrity. Beethoven was a cosy little Bavarian sock salesman. Bach's Goldberg variations are, I believe, a Niagara Falls of putrid shitwater. No, what Pierre objects to in Mistek, of course, is his listenability. For example, the coda of this gorgeous Prelude for Yanka, 1938, Death's Head, Beetle, Trumpeter, Swan, Horse, Raven, and by pure chance, Rain, 42 seconds, and full of tantalizing glimpses of what may be a very complex musical intelligence. Is it chance? Well, I hear gestures towards a radical polytonality in this piece. See if you agree. Where is it? Here we are.
All through September, Wenceslas and I laboured like slaves to raise our swan from B-flat to B. And yet if the animal did not itself love the music, surely it would be impossible to train it thus.
When the war broke out, Daddy managed to get me and Mummy to Denmark, and we got a place on a ship going to Hull, and I miss him every day. Because, of course, in 1945, when it was all over, we found ourselves on different sides of the Iron Curtain. So I lost my father when I was 6 years old.
Oh, dear. Forgive me if this is too personal a question, but is that why you never married?
Well, perhaps a little. But I think there's also the question of never quite meeting the one. What am I saying? I was married for 25 years to Richard, very happily.
Yet the Symphony for All Creation owes its existence to the fact that the Soviet Empire had, in 1945, swallowed Poland whole. Hilary Finn.
There's quite a well-known editorial in Pravda of March 1946 in which the General Secretary, that's Stalin to you and me, is quoted as saying, Soviet music should make use of all the latest techniques, but its idiom should be clear and accessible to the masses. He's laying down the template for the USSR's post-war cultural direction. Now, it's often forgotten, but Stalin was an opera-goer, he enjoyed folk music, and he genuinely liked Mistek's work.
I know joy because fate, in the person of Cultural Commissar Zhdanov, has granted my innermost dream. I am to have a dacha near Smolensk. I am to have whatever animals I require. I am to have all the assistance of the state with my work, everything. And I know despair, because my two darlings will not be there to enjoy it with me.
Well, the appeal to Stalin is obvious. Here we have a totally new revolutionary music, which is both futuristic and free from musicians' inherently individualistic and thus counter-revolutionary impulses.
From 1945 onwards, our knowledge of Mistek has, for obvious reasons, been patchy at best. We know that the Symphony for All Creation took Mistek 7 years to create. We know it involved a large orchestra. We know it was popular, and that after Stalin's death, Mistek seems to fall out of favour. But, until now, that was basically all. So these tapes are revelatory. They consist of many recordings made over the 7-year-long rehearsal process and full recordings of 3 of the symphony's 6 performances. When I first began these interviews, the performance tapes were still being kept under lock and key ahead of their premiere in front of a select audience in Moscow. But the rehearsal tapes were already causing a sensation.
That's Mistek. Now, this recording was made in 1948. Mistek is working on a tricky sprezzatura sequence with an elk. Let's listen, shall we? And I'll translate. Mistek is complaining about the elk's timbre. He's saying, it sounds like Brahms, very heavy, Germanic, it's wrong. Listen to Wenceslas, he hates it. That's Svetlana Ivanova, one of Mistek's assistants. No. Artur, please calm down. No, Svetlana, I'm angry, furious. Well, there was some sort of collision there. Artur, you must control your temper. Just because you're a genius does not mean you can... Don't tell me I'm a genius. I'm a fool. Get out. Out. Take your tea and go. Yes. What the hell was that? That was it. Svetlana is... that's indecipherable. And then... Yes. I'm sorry. I spilt my tea on the elk. You spilt your tea. But that's a miracle. Do it again. And then a very interesting debate ensues about the ethics of scalding elks to create a purer music.
Jackpot! These tapes are going to occupy Mistek scholars for decades. The setup in Smolensk was lavish. Mistek has at least 24 assistants, and now we can say, yes, this can only be described as an animal orchestra. By 1948... Mistek's begun to incorporate the textures of animals on real instruments. 2 Moths on a Gong, June 1950. The moth gong is further refined with Mistek's invention of the butterfly harp, a cat's cradle, if you will, of over 300 strings tuned to different pitches, through which a cloud of butterflies passes. Unbelievable. A lot of collateral damage to the butterflies, but the corpses fall onto a gong, so it's win-win. Or win-lose-win. It's redemptive. Now, the theremin. Oh, boy. Mistek has trellised a honeysuckle to the left of the theremin. A hovering hummingbird darting back and forth alters the pitch as it sips the nectar. To the right, Wenceslas, hovering above a fan providing updraft, controls the volume. That is beautiful. You gotta consider the state of animal music in the West. It's no wonder Stalin was drooling.
Joined by a gentleman from Houston, Texas, who isn't going to be Houston so much as hootin'. Mr. Rocky Red, what's that you've got under your arm, Rocky?
Oh, well, Ed, this is a goose bagpipe. Y'all inflate your goose, and you ram the pipe with the fingering holes down its throat. Now, with your right elbow, y'all just go right ahead and squeeze that goose. And with your left hand, you can play any damn tune you want.
Mistek's working on a section of his second movement here, using light to conduct grasshoppers and Cuban tree frogs. Light on diurnal grasshoppers, light off nocturnal tree frogs. Simple, staccato, fine. Now, 1950, Mistek introduces a lark and a troop of frog-eating monkeys. Light on, the lark sings. The grasshoppers sense a predator and fall silent. But gradually, a diminuendo of fear. Bingo! Dynamics. Now the tropical payoff. Ravenous monkeys decimate the frog population, removing individual tonalities from the frog soundscape. Do you hear? Yes. Until one solo frog remains, plaintive in its monkey-proof box.
But pressure was building on Mistek. It had taken him from 1946 to 1950 to train Leonid, his lead elk. Leonid's sudden death in a scalding accident meant that whole sections of the symphony had to be begun again from scratch, and there were other unforeseen glitches. Mistek had a number of animals it took 4.5 years to train, which only had 5-year lifespans. Half a decade of punishing instruction, a brief twilight of competence, then they'd die. It all added to the pressure.
1951. We're hearing a real shift towards instrumentation. The modernist impulses are being stripped back in favor of getting it right. And that means one thing. Chimps. A chimpanzee can learn a sequence of up to 16 consecutive actions. At 16 notes per chimp, given the unparalleled monkey-procuring potency of the fearsome Soviet Empire, Mistek can theoretically compose pages and pages of melody, relayed from chimp to chimp. Yes, there's a loss in terms of artistic purity, but a big gain in melodic accuracy. And that's what Stalin needs to hear.
In 1952, the Symphony for All Creation was ready. Commissar Zhdanov had managed to survive the latest particularly intense round of purges, and we now know, in fact, that in 1952 Stalin was preparing a second Great Terror, which would doubtless have claimed millions of lives. But Zhdanov had hung on, and Mistek was confident.
If I am to do anything as an artist, then this is it. I have, I think, done my best. The universe is singing to me, and its song is beautiful.
December the 9th, 1952. The first performance. The reaction among contemporary Mistek scholars to the airing of the performance tape was one of unanimous disappointment, even shock. When I tried to contact Larry Gompert, I was informed that he had taken indefinite leave. But there is a twist in this story of Artur Mistek, a twist which makes him one of the most beautiful of all dreamers. Hitherto classified letters, released within days of the performance tapes, show a Mistek in agony. Diary entry, January the 6th, 1953.
I have no talent. I have not become so corrupt I fail to recognise that. But what is 1,000 times worse is to hear wave upon wave of applause piercing me like an arrow shower, and to think I must endure another performance next week, and then another, and another. I shall go mad.
Of course Stalin and the Politburo loved it. It all makes so much sense now. Neo-classical, romantic, melodically dull, but with a pattern of progressive seeming technique. Exactly their cup of tea. I hadn't known, but Stalin went to every performance of it. Now this 6th performance 5th of March 1953. Well, just listen to this. That's as high as I can get it, but do you hear, Wenceslas? And from the letters we know that at this point Mistek leaves the stage. The Polish Nocturne in E-flat, Chopin's most heartbreaking paean to the idea of a free Poland. Mistek could not have chosen a more offensive piece to confront Stalin with. And of course the animals can't be stopped because they're taking their cues from Wenceslas. Stalin is being mocked by a xylophone-playing crow. As a satirical gesture, I've never heard anything to touch it in the history of the 20th century. Mistek may have been a lousy musician, but he was a great man. He goes home and waits for the knock on the door. He knows he's a dead duck. He knows all his beloved animals will be shot. And they were. And what happens? Stalin is driven in a motorcade in a towering rage to his dacha at Kuntsevo and has a stroke. 5th of March 1953, Joseph Stalin dies. Mistek killed Stalin. So you could say Mistek's music saved millions of lives.
Imagine the Cuban Missile Crisis with Jack Kennedy facing down Joe Stalin. Khrushchev, sure. Stalin? I don't think so. Artur Mistek saved the goddamn planet.
In killing Stalin, if he did, Mistek saved his own life. He was sentenced to 50 years in the Gulag, later commuted to 25. In 1978, he was allowed to return to Poland, where, old and frail, he passed his remaining days recording the sounds of the Białowieża forest.
I never expected to be holding this. One of Daddy's very last tapes, dated 3 weeks before his death. On the case in Polish, that means a bear for Margareczka.
Like in the letter, of course. Could this virtuoso of the woods have more music in him than Chopin himself?
Beautiful Dreamers is written by James Lever and Nat Segnet. Larry Gompert was played by Toby Jones, Dr. Hilary Finn, Charlie Higson, Margaret Haynes, Eleanor Bron, the actor Zeb Soanes, and Luca Davanzati was Peter Marinka. The music consultant was David Pigvance, and the producers were Stephen Canny and Sasha Yevtushenko.